Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today we reach new depths of mermaid lore as we look at the mermaids of the Pacific and Australia. Now I was able to find stuff from Guam and Hawaii, but the biggest concentration of mermaid stories in the Pacific came from the Philippines, and I'm going to expand on that in just a bit. First, I would like to throw in a quick reminder from one of my Patreons, a marine biologist, who asked me to pass on that if mermaids did exist, they would more likely be sea mammals than fish. This has been your reminder. Also, I'm going to mention that this topic was chosen by my Everwise patrons, whose ranks you can join for as little as $1 a month by clicking on the link in the description below. Before we plunge into this topic, some points of interest I like to touch on. The bulk of this video is going to be focused on Filipino mermaid lore, but even more specifically, the lore of the Ilocano people. A fun fact about the Philippines, by the way, is that the islands don't have a majority ethnic linguistic group. The Tagalog people are the single biggest group, but the census data that I was able to find has them at between 24 to 26% of the country. To give a counterexample, the Ilocano are the third or possibly fourth largest group, and they're at about 8%. The reason we have these stories is they were written down in English by an American, Henry Otley Bayer, who first came to the Philippines as a teacher in 1905. He would return to the U.S. in 1908 and get a degree in anthropology, and then he promptly turned around, went back to the Philippines in 1909, where he started his field work and compiled a 150-volume work on the various peoples of the Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and Sulu archipelago islands, which are all a collection of islands or islands in the Philippines. In 1914, he joined the staff of the University of the Philippines and set up the Department of Anthropology there. He would continue working there until his retirement in 1954, and he would remain in the Philippines until his death. So I would like to say a special thank you to Professor Bayer for making these stories available in English, and thank you to all the Filipinos who shared these stories and beliefs with him. Without your contributions, we would never hear about this stuff in the English-speaking world. So, thank you for sharing. So, let's start with the Gamo Gamo, who, before the Spanish showed up, may have been river gods or possibly patron spirits of different waters, sort of like how the Greeks gave every river its own deity, and nymphs were often the daughters of these river gods. The Gamo Gamo stood watch over the fresh waterways, with males being the guardians and embodiments of large rivers, and the ladies watching over the smaller streams and creeks. Although there was, according to the traditions, one extremely large, powerful Gamo Gamo who lived in the ocean and watched over sea craft. Interesting note, from the waist down, they looked like a fish that was called a magnagat. And from what I can find, that's one of many names in the Philippines for a fish that in English is called a mangrove snapper. Next up, we have the kata, which some of my sources claim is a higher ranked merfolk and that traditional art often showed them wearing crowns. All of my sources agree that they are often incredibly unfriendly, posing as swimmers or stranded fishermen in distress to lure people in so they could drown them. The sources differed on what they looked like, with some claiming they had a human form from the waist up and fished down like the classical mermaid that we're all thinking of, with others claiming that they had human legs but with fins on their arms and legs and gills to breathe water with. They are also said to sing very sad, beautiful songs when the sea is calm, and like sirens, will use their singing to lure victims to them and then drown them. They're very big on drowning. Also considered to be incredibly hostile is the Shokoi, which maybe an import from cultural diffusion. We've talked about that earlier, from China, where it may have started out as the shugoi, which is kind of a ghost of a drowned person. The shokoi in the Philippines, on the other hand, is very physical and very alive, and is depicted as an aquatic human who looks kind of like the creature from the Black Lagoon and is really into drowning people. In some parts of the islands, they're also called ugkoi or yukoi, and they're rumored to use floods as sort of cover to come in and attack people by swimming up the flood water, grabbing people by the feet, and just yanking them under to drown. In some sources, it is suggested that they eat the people they drown. So, I guess they're not being wasteful at least. Either way, swim carefully in those waters, folks. The Majin Dara has a more mixed reputation. They have colorful scales and wonderful voices. They're usually shown as female, and they're known to rescue those in need, but also known to attack and drown people. Now, different groups in the Philippines have different stories about them. The Bicolano people say they were originally serpents with human voices who ate adults and left children alone, and over time the stories gradually turned them into mermaids. In the Tagalog lore, however, they ignore adults and specifically target young boys. Instead of killing and eating them, however, they will take young boys down to their watery palaces, grant them the ability to breathe water, and basically raise them to be their husbands when they grow up. Which I think is still pretty creepy and messed up. At least in my opinion. Plus, I mean, if you're really looking for a human husband, you couldn't go to like a marine biologist or an oceanographer mixer or something. I'm pretty sure at least some of the people who have devoted their entire lives to studying the ocean and what lives in it would be real excited to make a marriage and get the ability to breathe water, and they'd probably be okay living in your watery palace forever if that's what it means. I'm just going to throw that out there as an alternative to kidnapping. Getting back to the Econo people, they focus on two different types of mermaid. The Sirena, which is a Spanish loan word. Some of my sources are really sure that they were originally called Incandana, which I understand means guardian of a body of water. The Sirena are all female and are sometimes paired with a male counterpart called a Litao. There's a pair of stories about them that I could find. The first one is kind of bittersweet. A Litao falls in love with a human woman, interestingly enough named Serena, and brings her to the seas, shows her around his kingdom, and then asks her if she'll marry him. She's pretty excited about this. Maybe she's a marine biologist in the spirit or something. And she says yes. He gives her a potion created from his blood that not only turns her into a mermaid, but grants her immortality. It comes at a cost, though. He not only gives up his immortality, but his lifespan is shortened to 100 years. He decides not to mention this, though, and they live pretty happily together and have 7 daughters over that century. When his time is up, he confesses the secret and spends his last days comforting his distraught wife and daughters, and then dies in peace. Serena returns to the surface to publicly mourn her dead husband in a Catholic church before returning to the sea. 100 years is a long time, and he died saying he had no regrets in the story, but I have to wonder how many of us would trade immortality for 100 years in even a happy marriage. Or just 100 years with a person that you love instead of living alone forever. I guess that's a decision everyone would have to make for themselves. Now, the second story I have for you is funnier. A Serena falls in love with an American engineer and starts trying to romance him through songs and gifts. But the problem is, she has a very strong fishy smell, and he has a very sensitive sense of smell. So every time she gets too close to him, he just faints dead on the spot. Well, one day he decides he's had enough of this random fainting stuff and having weird gifts show up on his window and hearing a weird voice in the night. So he takes a piece of banana and smears it under his nose, thinking it would block any of the smell that's, knocking him out. She shows up at his door having transformed herself into a human woman, and things are going well until they kiss. And that wipes the banana away, and he realizes she's the one who's been knocking him out with her fishy smell, and he is instantly repulsed. At this point, she decides, screw it, to hell with boundaries, and just turns into a mermaid right in front of him, grabs him, and tries to drag him into the water. He, in a panic, fights her off, grabs his rifle, and fires, missing her completely, but she panics and flees, and he just kind of goes, ugh, and goes into that Victorian faint that I've criticized Victorian protagonists for before. When he wakes up, he jumps up, runs to the nearest airport, gets a ticket to the United States, and never leaves his country again. Which is a happier ending than most kidnapped folks in mythology get, so I think he should take that as an absolute win. So as we head down south, you'll be interested to know that Australia also has mermaid myths. In the Northern Territory regions, they instruct women on spiritual ceremonies and procedures related to fertility specifically. Now, most of the indigenous groups actually believe that mermaids live in freshwater instead of the ocean, so watering holes, lakes, ponds, and rivers. I say most because the indigenous groups are not a single monolith. They do have different languages, different belief structures, and different stories, and so on and so forth. What I was able to find mostly referred to the beliefs in the Yak, which was a type of mermaid that lived in the rivers, could control the weather, and shapeshift into humans and all manner of aquatic creatures, including the Australian crocodile. The most interesting complete story that I was able to find about them was about a young hunter who ran into two of these ladies sunning on a river and decided he's going to kidnap one and force her to marry him. Yeah. So we already know he's not the greatest guy, and on top of that, I have to question the intelligence of a man who thinks kidnapping someone who can cause storms or shapeshift into a crocodile in the middle of the night while they're sharing a tent with you is a good idea. Never mind the morality of it, which is bad. I don't feel like I have to say that, but I'm just going to go ahead and state that controversial moral opinion. Kidnapping people is bad. Moving on. He might not be a great guy, he might not be a smart guy, but he's a really good hunter, and he's a very brave guy. I'm going to give him that. Because after several attempts, his ultimate plan is to create a disguise by weaving together water plants like a kind of ghillie suit and wade through croc-infested waters so he can get close enough to grab the mermaid and run. And it works! So he's also a fast runner. We know that too, because he outran those crocs. So, once he kidnaps one, he ties her up, starts a fire, and according to the story, if you expose a mermaid's tail to the smoke of a human-made fire, her tail will pop off and expose human legs, which is convenient. It's convenient. He then ties her to a tree, feeds her twice a day, brings her clothes, and talks to her until she seems to accept the idea that he's her husband She's his wife. This is just going to be his life now. And honestly, this rather evil plan seems to have worked until he let his guard down and let her go off to the river by herself to fetch some water, where she promptly jumped into the river and swam away. I'm going to be honest here, folks. I think he deserved worse and he got off light here, because this could have very easily ended up into her shapeshifting into a crocodile in the middle of the night, and what are you going to do at that point, right? So, lucky him. I'm feeling like this video is starting to run a little long, so while I do have a mermaid story from Guam, I'm going to post that up as a separate video, and maybe that'll just be up for access to my patrons, or maybe I'll put it on YouTube as a bonus. I might ask the patrons to vote on that. I will, however, share a mermaid story from Hawaii. This is the story of Honokaweli Pond. This pond was a popular hangout for kids and teens who would use it for various reasons, some of which we will call romance in deference to our dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. Well, one day a number of teens had a party that went really late, and they staggered home after dark, not realizing that they were short a young lady. The young lady in question's mother woke up from a deep sleep, believing she heard her daughter's voice calling out, and she followed that voice to the pond, where she saw her daughter swimming out in the moonlight in the deepest part of the pond. She called to her daughter to come out of the water and come home. You know, I'll comb your hair, I'll fix you a snack, it's time to come home. But her daughter just waved and smiled and would not come out of the water. She called out again, and this time a handsome young man appeared and smiled rather apologetically to the mother as her daughter leapt up from the water to show she had traded her legs for a magnificent and colorful fishtail, before she and her young man disappeared under the water, never to be seen again. It's at this point that the young lady's mother realized that the man must have been a ship-shifting spirit who used the party to approach her daughter and convinced her to trade life on land for a fishtail and life in the water. Which is why, teenagers, your parents want you to come home and not stay out late, because otherwise some sorceress type might convince you to marry them and you'll disappear into some strange otherworldly realm. No, wait, that's probably not it. Well, I'm sure you guys can figure it out. Okay, on that note, I think this is a good place to stop. I hope you found the video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or even subscribe. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. Could not do this without you. Next week, we're going to try and tackle New World mermaids. No promises I can keep that to one video, because we are talking about 2 continents there. After that, we finally approach Europe, and I'm very sure that's not going to be one video, but I'm going to do my best. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.